Cinderella's skin was white as alabaster in the beam of the flashlight. She wasn't a fan of sunbathing. Her body was thin as a rail. Some might say she was anorexic. Her breasts were tiny bumps on her chest. She kept hoping they'd develop as she got older, but she wasn't ashamed of them either, or the rest of her body for that matter. She was actually kind of an exhibitionist, and didn't mind at all undressing in front of her friends. She climbed onto the sarcophagus, making sure the boys got a good view of her ass. They cheered and whistled. She stood up, her naked feet on the cold slab next to the stone feet of the sleeping man carved on the lid. This would be a lot easier, she thought, if she had some music to dance to. Maybe Android Lust or London After Midnight. Then the perfect song came to her, Sideshow by The Wake. She started playing it in her head. With the guys cheering her on, Cinderella began strutting up the legs of the stone figure, shaking her hips. She walked slowly, partly because she thought it was sexy, but also because it wasn't easy maintaining her balance on the uneven surfaces of this dude's legs. When she reached his torso, she rubbed her foot into his crotch. "You like that, Mr. Eddington?" she said. "You must, because your heart is a rock." The guys laughed. She continued on to his stomach. Her footing was more stable on the wider platform. She turned to the boys and began gyrating her hips. As they voiced their approval, she twirled around. Facing the head of the sarcophagus again, she took another step. On the chest of the stone figure, someone had placed a single red rose. It looked fresh. Someone must have really liked him. Keeping her legs straight, she bent over and picked up the rose. Bringing it to her nose, she inhaled its scent. She loved the smell of roses. Turning back to the guy, she lightly rubbed the petals against her left nipple. The boys cheered. She slid the rose down the left side of her body, then up the right to her other nipple. After rubbing her nipple a few times, she brought the rose to her mouth. Careful not to stick herself with the thorn, she took the stem between her teeth. Sin didn't know how to belly dance, but she gave it her best shot. "Shake it, baby, shake it!" Thorn shouted. She did for a little bit, then got down on her knees, straddling the head of Mr. Eddington's effigy. She started grinding her pelvis over his face. The guys went crazy. "That's one lucky dead man," said Thorn. Cinderella suddenly stopped. "Don't stop now, girl. Keep going." Sin thought she felt the stone vibrate beneath her. She wanted to feel it again. A second later, she heard and felt a muffled knock from inside the sarcophagus. Scrambling to her feet, she said, "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "Something knocked inside the coffin." "He's probably masturbating," Thorn said. Adrian laughed. "I'm serious," she said. There came another knock, louder than before. Sin screamed and jumped off the sarcophagus into Thorn's arms. He eased her to the floor. "Tell me you heard that," she said. Hiding behind him, no one spoke. They all stared at the sarcophagus. Cinderella's heart pounded so loudly in her head that she feared it might be drowning out the knocking. "It's just your imagination," Thorn said. "I thought I heard something too," said Adrian. "Only because she suggested it," Thorn said. Sin was about to insist that she really heard something when there came 3 faint knocks from inside the sarcophagus. Everyone jumped back. "There, you see?" "No way," Adrian said. "Somebody's in there," he said. "Let's get the fuck out of here," said Adrian. "How can there be anyone in there?" Thorn said. "The thing's 100 years old and the door was locked." "The rose," she said. "Somebody put it there recently. Whoever did probably must have buried someone inside there." "Why?" said Adrian. "He must have thought the dude was dead and wanted to hide the body," said Thorn. "I think it's a girl trapped inside there," said Cinderella, imagining herself locked in the dark with no air to breathe. "Why do you say that?" "Because of the rose," she said. "What man would put a rose in the grave of another man?" "A gay man," Thorn said. "Well, it doesn't matter. We have to get him or her out of there," she said. "Okay," Thorn said. "I don't like this," said Adrian. "We should leave." "We can't just leave her in there," Cinderella said. "Who knows how much air she has left?" Come on, you gotta help me, Thorn said, stepping up to the sarcophagus. He bent and examined the lid for a moment. Rising, he held the flashlight toward Cinderella. Here, hold this. She took it. Shine the light here, he said, pointing to where he wanted it. He jammed the flat end of the crowbar into the seam of the lid. Adrian, help me push down. Adrian put both hands on the bar. On 3. 1, 2, 3. The two boys pushed down on the crowbar. With a grinding sound, the lid tilted up about half an inch before crashing down after it slipped off the crowbar. Sin cringed at the loud thud. Thorn wedged the bar back under the lid. As he got down on one knee, he said, "This time, push up." Adrian gripped the crowbar again. Ready? 1, 2, 3. They grunted as they pushed with all their might. The lid rose up, then sideways a fraction of an inch. Tiny shards chipped and fell as iron ground against stone. They kept pushing until there was a small opening at the corner of the sarcophagus. "Okay," Thorn said, taking a breath. He turned to Cinderella. "Give it here," he said, taking the flashlight. He shined the light through the hole. "What do you see?" said Adrian. "Quiet," Thorn said. Then he shouted into the sarcophagus. "Can you hear me in there?" Silence. Then seconds later, 2 knocks in reply. "Hang on, we're going to get you out." He turned to Adrian. "Push here," he said, pointing to the corner of the lid. He handed the flashlight back to Sin, then wedged the crowbar under the lid again. "Ready," he said to Adrian. "Let's do it." 1, 2, 3. Working together, the two moved the lid a few inches. As Thorn repositioned the crowbar, Cinderella shined the light into the open grave. What once must have been an expensive wooden coffin filled the granite sarcophagus. Covered in a fine layer of dust, a large silver crucifix rested on top. The stench of decay filled the air. She couldn't imagine what it must be like trapped inside the coffin with that foul odor. "Get back," Thorn said. Sin stepped back to give them room. "Okay, again." This time the boys moved the lid several inches. The heavy slab was teetering on the edge of the sarcophagus. Thorn dropped the bar. "One more time," he said, placing both hands on the stone. With a last push, the lid crashed to the floor with a loud thud and the shattering of stone. "Shit," Adrian exclaimed. "That damn thing was heavy." Cinderella reached into the sarcophagus and tried to open the coffin, but it wouldn't budge. "Hold on, we're almost there," she yelled. Thorn tried to open it, but he couldn't do it either. "Give me the light," he said. He shined the beam along the length of the coffin. "Somebody nailed the damn thing shut. We've got to get it open," she said. Thorn grabbed the crowbar off the floor and quickly pried the coffin open a couple of inches, enough to free the nails. Suddenly, the lid flew open. Before anyone could react, a gray figure in a moldy wedding dress sat up and seized Thorn by the throat. Cinderella screamed. Adrian screamed. Thorn tried to scream, but the sound was choked off by the bony fingers around his neck. The woman must have been wearing makeup or a really good mask, for she looked like she had been trapped in the tomb for years, not hours or days. Her eyes were sunk deep within their sockets. Her gray-brown skin was stretched tight over her cheekbones. Her withered lips were pulled back from her teeth. Her nose seemed to have rotted off her face. She looked dead, except for the fact that she was moving. With a strength that belied the figure's wasted appearance, the bride pulled Thorn into the coffin. Cinderella watched in horror as the bride pulled Thorn into a kiss. Blood trickled down his neck, where her fingernails dug deep into his flesh. Adrian dashed for the exit. Sin hesitated for a moment, then ran after him.